Have a look at this fabulous chart. And now this one and this one. What you know what they all have in common? Yes, exactly. They use our favorite Parma penguins dataset. But apart from being about our furry friends, actually, I'm not quite sure. Are penguins furry? Probably not. They're like more slick and I don't know if this is considered fur. But in any case, what all of these charts also have in common is that they look hand-drawn. So in today's video, I'll show you what package you need to make this work, and I'll also show you some of the tricks you may need to get the most out of that package. So with that said, let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is to create a standard chart. This one we're going to use as a basis to show you what you need to modify so that everything becomes hand-drawn. So what we need to do is to take our Parma penguins dataset. Just on the rare occasion you haven't seen them, regular viewers of this channel have seen this dataset. Here, this is how our data looks. And then we're going to pass this to ggplot where we map our aesthetics. And here we're going to use for the x-axis the species column, for the y-axis the body mass column, and then for the fill color we're going to use species again just to bring in color. And then we're going to throw a GM violin layer on top of that, and then we have our first basic chart, which doesn't look too nice, which is the point of course, but still I want to show you a little bit that you can tweak even if you don't want to go for the hand-drawn look. So let's just throw in a couple of labels here. This is always a good thing for a chart. Then we throw in a theme minimal with a larger base size so everything becomes more legible. And then we should probably include the unit of the y-axis, which is gram, which we are currently not showing. So that's why we're modifying the Y scale, where we set the labels to scales label comma for formatting. This on its own will just throw in a comma into these numbers, which is not what we want, or at least not everything we want. We also want to have a suffix of gram, and then we see our unit inside of the chart. Okay, so that is our plot, but it is of course completely uninspired. It is a standard plot, nothing hand-drawn, nothing eye-catching. It's just standard. Technically nothing wrong with that, but we're going for a cool hand-drawn look here. And the way to make that happen is to load the ggsketch package. So what we do is library ggsketch, and then as you load it, you have all the sketchy things available for you. Speaking about sketchy, it is not really sketchy, I'm just making a terrible pun here, but speaking about it, if you want to install this package, you cannot actually install it from an official source like CRAN, you have to install it from GitHub, and that's why you have to go to the website, or actually you can do CRAN, so I guess I was wrong, nothing sketchy about this. In any case, you can either do install packages, or if you want to get the development version, which is what I did, you can run this command with the package. In any case, once you have this package, it's super easy to use it. All you have to do is to do gm sketch. You just have to spell it correctly and then use whatever GM you wanted to use anyway. So as I wanted to use GM violin, I'm replacing that with GM sketch violin. And then we see immediately this is now being sketched. So that's pretty cool, but we can go even further. What we can do is to replace theme minimal also with a sketchy theme. So let's do theme sketch, leave the base size as is, and then you will see that everything sort of became more hand-drawn, but you also see the legend kind of is missing the color now. That's a bit of a shame here, and you have to do some custom tweaking to get that back, but that's what I'll show you in a second. For now, I'd like to make the look more hand-drawn. So what I want to do is to use a different font so that the title of my plot is actually looking like it's handwritten, and the nice font that I like to use for that is the Xcali font. So in base family, I do Xcali font, and then for the overall look, we can modify other parameters like the roughness and set it to something like 0.5, and this on its own doesn't change anything yet because we have to enable a rough frame so that the frame that we see here is also drawn roughly. But you can also see that the hand-drawn look is now being clipped. It looks like on the right here there is part of the grid missing, or rather of the frame. And the way we can avoid that is inside of chord Cartesian, say clip is set to off. That's a standard trick in ggplot if you want to draw outside of the grid. And here we use it so that nothing is being cut off. And now just to demonstrate, if I increase the roughness, then things will look even rougher. And if I make it really large, then you see that things are starting to get wild. If that's what you're going for, feel free. But for now, I will just go back to 0.5. So now let's throw a couple of theme changes on top of that for a nicer aesthetic and also to move the legend to the top. So let's do theme. Let's connect everything with another plus here. And then let's do plot.title.position and set it to plot. That way the title shifts over to the left, which always looks nicer. Then we can do legend.position and set it to top. That's also always nice, but now the title and the legend kind of look so close together. So let's change this by specifying plot title and saying element text, and there we say the margin is supposed to be set by the margin function, where we set that the bottom parameter or the bottom margin is set to be 7 and the unit for that is millimeters. And then as I execute this, you see that there is more room now, which I personally prefer. So now that leaves us with fixing the legend. What's bothering me here, and probably also you, is that there is no color inside of the legend. And the reason why this happens seems to be that this sketchy hand-drawn look doesn't translate to legend items of all sizes. For example, if I were to use legend.key.size and set it to say 1 centimeter, then you'd see that, okay, now there is one line inside of this rectangle, but still it's very faint and I don't always want to increase the size of these small rectangles just to have a color coding. So instead, what we're going to do is to use a bit of custom ggplot code to make the rectangles look okay. And the way that is done is if we look at GM Sketch Violin, we see that these dots here, they are all the arguments passed to just regular ggplot layers. And one thing you can do in ggplot layers is draw the keys of a legend. So basically we need to override the function that draws these keys here. So what we're going to do is from ggsketch, take one of the internal functions, namely the draw key polygon function. And this is a function that depends on 3 arguments called data, params, and size. And this is what we normally use. But as I said, we want to tweak this so that the parameters here are actually using something so that the rectangle is fully filled. So instead of using that, we are wrapping this in our own function that we call draw key sketch violin filled. And this is a function also with arguments data, params, and size. And then inside of there, we can just use this internal function. But before we use it, we modify the parameters that are actually being used. And here the parameters are simply the parameters that we could normally use inside of GM Sketch. And as you can see, there is this parameter called fill style, and it can be one of this hasher, crosshatch, zigzag, or solid. So what we could do here is say params fill style will be set to solid, just have to spell it correctly. And then here we can use for the argument glyph key, whatever, I don't know how that's pronounced, that's a hard word to pronounce. In any case, for this argument, which is one of the standard ggplot layer arguments, we can just stick in this function. And now as we execute this, we see that hooray, now our legend is actually filled with colors. And this gives us the option to customize other things that we might like to change just for the legend. And as we look into the sketch here, we see that there are other parameters like n passes or bowing. And for example, let's do n passes and set this to something else. So let's copy this line here and then do n passes, and let's go for the default is 2, let's go for 10. So now as I re-execute this, you see that the border of the rectangle got thicker. As you can guess, n passes means the number of passes you do via this drawing the rectangle. So if you want to draw the border only once without redrawing it, you set it to 1, and then re-executing this gives you this look. And actually, I kind of like this look, so this is why I'm sticking with this one here. And just like before, we can copy this line and then use the roughness parameter to set it to something else like 0.9. And then re-executing this doesn't change too much. Maybe if we go for 0.1, then we see that, okay, now the squares look really squarish. If we increase this to say 2, then we have some really ugly looking rectangle. So maybe 0.9 was actually a good value to choose. So let's stick with this one here. Actually, maybe let's go even 0.75, such a beautiful number. We're going with this one here. Cool, so now we're already pretty deep in this GG Sketch package and we have learned a lot about customizations. So now it's time to see other things we can do with this GG Sketch package, because so far we have only looked at violence. And the cool thing about this package is that there are so many geoms and they are all hand-drawn ready. So for example, if we just replace, maybe not replace this, let's actually copy this part here and then let's go for a simple bar chart. So a geom bar thing would look something like this. Let's just go with this one here. If we execute this, we see that, okay, this cannot work if we specify X and Y. So let's specify only X. So now this will give us the count of species here. And now, and this is also what I should have done in the other chart, there really is no use for the legend. It just takes up space here. So let's just go with legend position is none. I just demonstrated that in a last plot because sometimes you do want to have this legend and you need a way to modify it so that it looks correct. But now that we have that, let's just not use a legend because in this scenario it isn't even necessary. And here we can modify the title. Let's go with penguin numbers. And then we don't need the scale y continuous anymore because it's just plain counts. And this right now would be a regular geom bar. And as I've said, you can turn any geom into a sketchy one by putting the sketch inside of the geom label. And then we have by default something that looks like this. To me personally, that doesn't look pretty. So let's change it by simply tweaking the parameters inside of this geom layer. So what we can do is to change the fill style. Let's go for Asher. Is that how it's pronounced? Today I'm having so many words that I cannot pronounce. Let's just go with this one. I think this was even the default, so this is why nothing really changed. But what we can do is change the fill weight and set it to say 0.75. And this also doesn't change too much. So let's actually go for crosshatch just to see some differences here. So now that we have that, we can use, I don't know, fill weight 0.5 and let's close the gap between the hatches. So let's do this hasher gap and set it to 0.1. We can actually go even lower, 0.5. So this looks better. And then we could decrease the roughness and set it to 0.3. There's no perfect choice here. Just play around with these parameters to see what you like. Here, I kind of like this look. Finally, let's do one more chart, which is a ridgeline chart. We can once again copy all of this stuff here. And then let's go for geom, sketch, and then you see all of the charts that you have. There's so many of them, and inside of the documentation, I'll show you that in a second. You can even see examples of that. So here, as I said, we want to do a ridgeline plot. So let's go for ridgeline. This one will need an X and Y coordinate. Here Y should be set to species and X can be a numeric variable like body mass G. And now as I execute this, we see that, okay, this is how our weights are distributed by species. This is a typical ridgeline plot. Just like in a standard ggplot, you can change the color of the outline of this density plot and say the color should be gray 20. And then you have something that looks like this. And if you don't like that, for example, the chin strap density plot versus the Gen 2 density plot, then you can set the scale and set it to, for example, 1. This will make sure that nothing crosses, but I actually prefer if we go to something like 0.8, and there you go, there is our density plot, or rather a ridgeline plot, how it is actually called. And I've also promised you a whole gallery of all the other geoms. You can find them via the GG Sketch package documentation, go to articles, and then For gallery, you will find for every geom, you will find an example plot. You have chiclet charts, which makes use of these rounded rectangles, which is pretty cool. You can use lollipops, spherical, CDF. There are a whole bunch of charts that you can create, and all of them will have this hand-drawn look to it, and via the parameters I've shown you in this video, you can modify them according to how you want them to look. Nice. With that, we have learned about one more cool package in the ggplot ecoverse. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you did. And if you want to learn more about ggplot, why don't you check out this playlist here, which covers a whole more inside of the ggplot universe. So now, with all of that said, I say thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.